Thank you, Carly. I said in the first service, Carly does such a great job up here. I was ready to sign up for everything. We hope you will be taking advantage of the fall. It's really a time in the fall when after summer where some of our schedules are so changing from week to week, we can kind of settle into a routine, and the Christian life operates very well when we get into routines and good habits, whether it's Sunday church, small group, the whole kind of rhythm of life together as a church family. Part of that is we're starting a new series today in 1 Samuel. Actually, 1 Samuel is going to be the beginning of a trip through some of these historical books in the Old Testament. And so we're going to have you be in an actual Bible today. That Bible can be on your smartphone, that's fine. But we need you to be able to see more than just the sermon outline. And the reason is when we're in the New Testament, we're picking little chunks of 6 or 8 verses to go through, and I can usually fit those all in the sermon outline. But when we're in the Old Testament, we're going through large pieces of narrative. Today I've been assigned like 3 chapters in 1 Samuel. We'll get barely through one of them this morning, but you're going to need to have a Bible in front of you because I'll be reading extended portions of 1 Samuel, and it's so much better if you don't just hear it, but you can follow along in the text as well. A lot of water's gone under the bridge since I was up here last. Boy, I think I haven't preached for quite a few weeks, and that water that's gone under the bridge in the Hellerman family has been very, very turbulent water. Some of the most challenging things family-wise that we've ever faced have happened late summer, and we're still wrestling through issues even as I speak. I don't know where you're at. Maybe this is a really positive time, an easy time in your life, but in a group this large, I don't doubt that some of you are experiencing turbulence and challenges in your life that would dwarf the stuff even that we're going through. Now, what if in view of all that, I told you today that I have a supernatural resource that will allow you to endure the challenges you're facing at this time in your life with encouragement and hope? Would you hang around a half hour to listen to the sermon? Well, you already are. And this is the beautiful thing here, because when we turn to the Old Testament, that's what we're turning to, is this supernatural resource. Check out what Paul wrote here. Paul writes, whatever was written in former days, and he's talking about the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. He says, was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. Through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. It's interesting, a lot of times the New Testament is so accessible to us. It's Jesus and the early church, and the Old Testament seems so daunting that we sort of think about, Jesus at the cross where he says, it is finished, and we think, well, if it's finished, why do I have to worry about the stuff that came before the Old Testament? Well, folks, the work of Jesus is finished, but the work of God in your life and mine is not finished. And apparently, the Old Testament is a crucial piece in us finding hope and encouragement in the midst of the stuff life throws at us this side of eternity. I read that depending on what you count as a direct quotation versus an allusion, the New Testament quotes the Old Testament over 800 times. I found that astounding. That means to these folks who are writing the New Testament and who are so excited about what Jesus had done and continues to do in his church through the Holy Spirit, that they were spreading the gospel all over the Roman Empire. To these folks, apparently, what was written in former days, the Old Testament scriptures, were so important they quote them 800 times to encourage New Testament believers to stick to the faith and to be encouraged. And so as we turn to 1 Samuel, and we're going to look at 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings over the next few months together, there's going to be great encouragement. And this passage today is no exception. It is just a remarkable, remarkable passage. We're in 1 Samuel, so I need to kind of set the scene here in 1 Samuel. It's not a happy time. This is not a happy time for the people of God. The Israelites had this just like major high point when they blew into the land of Canaan and conquered all the Canaanites and set up this amazing tribal confederacy in a land flowing with milk and honey, and then they basically forgot about God because things were going good in their lives. Ever do that? Things are going so good, things are firing so good at the job, at home, everything, and oh yeah, God, kind of do. Well, the Israelites, it was even a little bit less than, oh yeah, God. In fact, there's a refrain that comes a couple times in the book of Judges, which is right before our period, where it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Forget about what God says. Forget about his word. Forget about this incredible story that God's written me into, that I'm a part of. I'm going to do what I feel in my heart is right for me. You know, this whole deal of following your heart, my goodness, we think it's all new, right? Apparently not. This was, 1,000 years plus before the time Jesus was even born. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. And there's an interesting principle that I think you and I have run into in our own lives probably, and that is this. Over in the book of James it says, God says, draw near to God and I will draw near to you. And the opposite is true. Ignore God and what happens? Go our own way. God doesn't stop us and just drag us back. God makes room for us to go and fall on our face. God will withdraw and allow us to stubbornly go our own way. So when we draw near to God, he draws near to us. We draw away from God. It's not that he's not there, but he has given us free will. And so interestingly enough, at this time in Israel's history, this is a very sad, sad statement. It says, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. Wow, pretty dark time in Israel's history. But amazingly enough, there's much to learn during a very dark time. And your outline consists of two parts. It's outlined in your bulletin today. We're not even going to get to the second half on the back, as it turns out. Some of that anticipates what's going on later in 1 Samuel. I was going to do kind of an overview of the book, and now I've ended up really focusing in on the first chapter here today. But you'll notice what I have up here, learning about my relationship with God and learning about our relationship with God. And as we move as a community here, as a congregation this fall into what is maybe a new portion of Scripture to some of us and begin to read 1 Samuel and hear sermons about it and discuss it in our groups, I want to just give you a little guidance on how to read this part of Scripture. In fact, you can apply these simple questions to any part of the Bible that you open and read. And the questions are basically threefold. It's really a good thing when we read our Bible to ask ourselves, one, what does this tell me about what God is like? Two, what does this tell me about me and my relationship to God? And three, a question most of us don't tend to go to, what does this tell me about us as the people of God and our relationship with God? Remember, if you look at the narrative of Scripture in your Bible, you'll discover it's not first and foremost about me and my relationship with God. It's the story of the people of God. It's about us. And as a congregation here, as a local church, a New Testament church here, we are an us, and we always need to be asking the questions, what does this tell us about us and our relationship with God? And there's some great things to learn there. Again, we won't get to the back of that outline today, but boy, are there some lessons about the people of God as a whole and how God works with us as a community and all. And so those are great questions. So when you read 1 Samuel for your small group this week, ask, what do I learn about God? What do I learn about me and God? What do I learn about us and God? And you'll have some good stuff to feed your spirit and your soul. Okay, we're going to talk today about learning about my relationship with God from 1 Samuel chapter 1, so I'm going to direct you there. It's on page 225 in the Bibles that you hopefully found under the seats in front of you. So we're going to get you there, 1 Samuel 1. I'm just going to start reading here a story of a very dysfunctional family. You think dysfunctional families just appeared, when the psychologists identified them as such here in the last few generations. No, they've been going on for a long, long time, and this one's really challenging. You'll see here in a minute. There's going to be a lot of conflict here. It says, there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. You think conflict is coming? Let me say that again. He had 2 wives, okay? The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. It's going to be a big, big deal, folks. Now, this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Remember, God dwelt in a very special place in his tabernacle, and it was up at Shiloh at this time. And so they'd go up yearly, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. You can just remember, if you can't remember those names, just remember idiot and idiot, because these are not good guys, as we're going to see in chapter 2, all right? Okay. They were priests of the Lord. Spiritual leadership was in a bad way during this time in Israel's history. Verse 4, on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah and his wife and to all her sons and daughters. She had all these kids. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And Hannah's rival, Peninnah, used to provoke Hannah grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, Peninnah used to provoke Hannah. Therefore, Hannah wept and would not eat. Imagine the scenario. They're sitting around at this big feast at the house of the Lord. Peninnah says to Hannah, Hannah, do all your children have their food? Dear me, there must be so many of you, it's hard to keep track. And then one of Peninnah's kids says, Mommy, Miss Hannah doesn't have any children. And Peninnah says, what did you say, dear? Miss Hannah doesn't have any children. Oh, yes, that's right. She doesn't have any children, does she? The child says, doesn't Miss Hannah want children? Peninnah says, well, why don't you ask her? Hannah, don't you wish you had children? The kid says, Mommy, doesn't Daddy want Miss Hannah to have children? Peninnah says, oh, yes, he does, but Miss Hannah just keeps disappointing him. She can't have any kids. And the child says, why not? Peninnah says, because God won't let her. And then the little child says, doesn't God like Miss Hannah, Mommy? Wow, you put yourself in Hannah's place and imagine the grief she's going through. Now, infertility is a huge deal in our culture when a young couple longs to have a child and somehow can't get pregnant. We have seen this with young couples in our church. The point of just desperation and sadness and darkness, and then all the awkward navigation through the medical community to see, how come the fertility and on this goes, and the prayers and tough stuff. But folks, in the ancient world, it was profoundly more serious and discouraging for a woman not to have a child, and especially not to have a son. And I want to help you see why by taking a look at ancient family systems, which were very, very different than family as we construct it and define it here in modern-day America. Family in modern-day America is built out of the marriage relationship, where 2 individuals make a choice to marry each other and have kids, and then there's the extended family, grandparents and others. Family was not defined that way in the ancient world. It was defined by the bloodline coming down from the father. The only vestige of that we have today is last names, that in most cases still the last name of the father in the family is the last name that the kids have. But this was what family was all about in the ancient world. This is an artificial little diagram. I don't really have a sister, but it'll show you how things shook out. So a couple would get married. We're calling him Patriarch and his wife, and they have 2 kids, me and my sister. Notice the yellow names are the people in the family, and the yellow line is the bloodline, the family line. And so what happens is, because both me and my sister have my father's blood, we are members of the family. But because family membership is patrilineal, only passed down the male line, only my son can pass on family membership to the next generation. My daughter cannot. This puts daughters in a very, very tenuous situation in a culture like this. In fact, there's a writer who wrote a document between the Old Testament and the New Testament who said, quote, the birth of a daughter is a loss. Now, I'll take issue with that. I have 2 wonderful daughters, one of whom is sitting right here in the auditorium right now. But boy, this was a tough place to be if you were a woman. So what was your role as a woman if you could not pass on the patriarch and contribute to the ongoing honor of the family by having kids that belong to the family? Your role was, well, you were sort of a bargaining chip that a father could arrange a marriage and marry you out into another kinship group in the village. Hopefully that kinship group would be a respected family with a high honor rating. And so if I'm the patriarch and I have a daughter, I want to get my daughter married into an honorable family because that enhances my family's honor and my position in the village and all kinds of stuff like this. So this is the goal, is to marry my daughter out into what is in fact another family. Another family. Because these folks don't have the father's bloodline. See, now we have this young woman who's in a real kind of awkward position because now she's part of a family that's really not her family. In fact, people in cultures like this, when it's time to go on vacation, you know where they go on vacation? They leave their husbands or their wives and they go back on vacation, spend vacation with their blood families because blood is thicker than contract, which is what marriage is in a culture like this. So now here's this woman, and she's in this family that's not her family. She still has an opportunity to become a meaningful human being. And that opportunity is to have a son. Because when a woman in this culture has a son, notice she is contributing to the future health, honor, and viability of that family she's moved into. So now she has a foothold in that family. Now she's become somebody, and now that's okay. If she doesn't have a son, she's like, well, we read about Rachel in Genesis who says to Jacob, "Give me sons or I will die." That's how serious it is. This, in fact, in turn explains a kind of an interesting passage in the Gospels. Jesus is teaching. He's at the height of his public ministry. Things have been going amazing, all these miracles and this and that. And right in the middle while he's talking, this lady stands up and she hollers out, "Blessed is the womb that bore you and the breasts at which you nursed." Now, if you read through this in your Bible in Luke 11, what happens is you just kind of blow through this and think this lady's talking about what a cool person Jesus is, right? Because we're reading about Jesus in Luke, but if you stop and think, she's not talking about Jesus at all, is she? She's talking about Jesus' mama, right? And she's playing right in to this view of family. Jesus, wow, did your mama become a person? Did she become somebody when she had the likes of you? Because look at all you're doing. Look how God is using you. Boy, blessed is the womb that bore you and the breast at which you nursed. Now, here's a really fun thing. This is not directly relevant to our text today, but it's something to really wrestle with. Jesus blows this out of the water. Jesus totally rewrites the cultural script, and Jesus says, blessed rather, it's a very strong adversative. On the contrary, blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it. So Jesus is totally redefining how a woman will become a person, and she'll become a person in God's eyes in a sense in the same way a man does, by being faithful to God, see. But we're not to Jesus yet in salvation history. We're back here in 1 Samuel, where this is how life works. And Hannah is a desperate, desperate woman because Hannah is barren. In fact, if you're familiar with your Old Testament, you know this theme of barrenness surfaces again and again in the Old Testament. Sarah finally gave birth to the son of the promise, Isaac, when he was 90 years old. Rebekah, if you do the math in Genesis 25, she didn't have any children for the first 20 years they were married. And I talked about Rachel, who was barren, and she says to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." So desperate was she. Manoah's wife was barren until she gave birth to Samuel. And then remember the New Testament, Elizabeth and Zechariah? We open the story of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, and first we get the story of John the Baptist. And here Elizabeth is old, and Zechariah is old, and she's barren. And Zechariah is told that she's going to have a kid, he's going to have a kid. And what did he do? He didn't even believe the angel who told him. And yet, sure enough, God shows up. And as we look through scriptures, we discover something very, very interesting, and that is that barren women, folks, barren women seem to be God's instruments again and again in raising up key figures in the history of redemption. God undertakes on behalf of the weak and empty and the powerless, and uses in the scriptures barren women again and again and again to accomplish his will. And we see this here in 1 Samuel. And so there's much to learn here about our relationship with God as we pick up the story here in 1 Samuel 1, verse 9. Peninnah's just ragged on Hannah again. And after they'd eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and says, Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Hannah was bitterly distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly, and she vowed a vow and says, O Lord of hosts, hang on to that title for a minute. O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. So Hannah cries out to God, and she cries out to God not as, Dear Heavenly Father, not with a title of intimacy, but one of the most expansive titles of God's sovereignty anywhere in Scripture. The idea of Lord of hosts, if you've never seen that, you might go, what is that all about? Is God the Lord of everybody who hosts a party? What is that? Lord of hosts means Lord of armies. And here's what one commentator writes about this word. It refers to God whose universal rule is, quote, encompasses every force or army, heavenly, cosmic, or earthly. There couldn't be a more dramatic, expansive, kind of infinite way to refer to God. Hannah goes to the God of all creation who was sovereign over every power, visible and invisible, in the universe. And Hannah somehow believes that God is not too big and too distant and too busy to care for the needs and heartache of a little peasant lady in 11th century, 12th century BC Judea. And she's right, because look what happens as this thing unfolds. It goes on in verse 12, as she continued praying, it says, Before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman, and Eli said to her, How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, No, my Lord, I'm a woman troubled in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Don't regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Hannah's very honest with God. When she talks about speaking out of her vexation, the writer uses a word here that is used most often in the Old Testament of Israel provoking God to anger. It's the anger word. Hannah is vexed, she's angry, she's frustrated, she's been painted into a corner by her circumstances and now by her rival just putting her down year after year after year. Eli answers, he says, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him. And Hannah said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. This is kind of cool here because God hasn't answered her prayer yet. But just being in the presence of God and just laying her burden before the Lord has lifted her spirits enough where she went and ate. That's a lesson right there, isn't it? Okay? But God comes through. Verse 19, they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife. The Lord remembered her. The Lord remembered her. The Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. That name Samuel would be like if we named a kid Answer. You prayed for a kid, you finally had a kid, and then, well, he's my answer to prayer. Let's call him Answer. Samuel's so familiar with us, but this is just how kind of striking this is. So, we saw our first kind of insight here that God uses barren women in the history of redemption to raise up his leaders. But there's a deal here that we need to embrace that goes far beyond just the issue of barren women, because there's a timeless principle here that we're facing that has to do with one of the most basic things you and I can know about how you and I, my relationship with God. And that is this, that God's power is perfected in my weakness, folks. God's power is perfected in my weakness. When this story starts, the strong are on top, okay? Penina's on top with her kids, ragging on Hannah. Eli and his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are on top, taking advantage of the Israelites who bring their offerings to the altar and ripping them off as they come. And Hannah's on the bottom, barren, nothing, weak, powerless. But again, God's power is perfected in my weakness. And Hannah found that out, and she writes this wonderful song, this wonderful poem in chapter 2 that we won't have time to look at, but I want to just look at a few verses because it really shows this grand reversal. This is God's ways, the grand reversal. Jesus hangs on the cross. 3 days later, he's resurrected from the dead. In eternity future, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. The grand reversal. For Hannah, she says, the bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on string. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The great reversal. The great reversal. And then I found this quote in a commentary I thought really put it all together for you and I, our experience with the ways of the Lord when God's people are without strength, without resources, without hope, without human gimmicks. Then he loves to stretch forth his hand from heaven. I'm looking across at so many wonderful, familiar faces, folks I've known for years and years and years, and I've seen this happen in your lives. You've seen it happen in our lives. I shared with you about the turbulent waters we're going through as a family right now. I went to school this fall, didn't even want to go back to Biola, and I went into my first classes, and at each one of the classes, I told them what was going on, and I said, I am completely empty coming here to teach you folks this semester. So I'm here to mentor and teach you. I would just covet your prayers for me. And it's been 3 weeks now in school, and I'm here to tell you this morning, these have been the most meaningful, powerful 3 weeks I've ever taught in years, decades of teaching out there. The sense of God's presence in the classroom, the connection with the students, excitement about the material. It has been utterly remarkable. And the only explanation I have is the goodness of God and the fact that when we run out, that's when God finally has room to do his thing in our lives. And so if you're here today, this is, you're facing challenges. These things were written that you might endure, and that through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. A beautiful, beautiful message here. Now, this is a theme that is repeated again and again in 1 Samuel. Think about it. In 1 Samuel, we encounter the first rock star in history. Anybody know who he is? He's only got 4 or 5 little rocks, but he's a rock star, big time. And I'm talking about little David and big Goliath, right? That passage basically summarizes, replicates, repeats exactly what we see here in 1 Samuel, where God turns the tables on all that appears to be strong, powerful, mighty, and effective in this world, and shows us what really is strong, mighty, powerful, and effective in the economy of the kingdom of God. And we will see that again and again in the passage. So now we've seen how what to do when we are empty and weak. What about when God comes through and blesses us by answering our prayers and gives us what we ask for? I think for some of us, our tendency is to kind of forget about God for a while and go away and enjoy what we've asked for. Okay? But Hannah does just the opposite. She takes what she didn't have and so desperately longed for, that God gave her, and she gives it right back to God. She gives Samuel right back to God. Check it out, starting with verse 21. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah didn't go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there, stay there forever. And so this would have been a 3-4 year process in this culture, weaning a child. And now, down in verse 26, Hannah is indeed brought Samuel back to Shiloh. And so she's talking to Eli now, and she says, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I'm the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed. She's all excited. And the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And Samuel worshiped the Lord there, and Hannah went home. Wow, she got what she wanted, and she gave it right back to God. You know, I did singles and college ministry for years and years. Joanna and I were involved with college kids, high school kids, and especially these high school and college kids. Boy, they're like in their big major life decision phase. And God gets a hold of them, and they catch the vision for what God can do in their lives, and they say, I'm signing on. I want to go around the world. I want to give my life to translate the Bible into a language that's never been translated into, share the gospel with a culture that's never heard it, to bring the gospel to a very difficult place clear across the world. I'm going for it. And then the interesting phenomenon happens, an understandable one at times, is the parents, good Christian parents who have been exposing their kids to missions and missionaries for 15, 20 years, all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, we're all about missions, but maybe not all about our own kid going to the other end of reality. Folks, we have couples in this church who have to wrestle with this, and they have kids. I see one of them right near in the back there, another one over here, with kids in their 20s who have said, Jesus, we're going, and we're taking the gospel around the world, and we're moving there, and we're going to live there. And so these parents are opening their hands and saying, God be with you, God bless you. We and your church family are going to pray for you and support you, and may the Lord do mighty, mighty things with you. Well, folks, this passage tells us that God honors those who honor him like this. God honors those who honor him like this. Check what happens. Here Hannah's childless, okay? She prays for a boy, prays for a child. She gets this amazing Samuel. She gives him back to the Lord. And look what God does in return, folks. 1 Samuel 2:21, the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. So, I know some of you are thinking, now I really don't want my kid to go to the mission field because I don't need 5 more kids in my family, okay? But isn't this a beautiful picture of the ways of the Lord? What we've seen here this morning, this beautiful, beautiful picture of the way God raises the humble. He's opposed to the proud. We don't have time to go into chapter 2, but boy, we have a mess in chapter 2 where the priest has these 2 out-of-control sons who are serving at the altar and stealing the sacrifices, or sleeping with women who hang out at the threshold of the temple, all this ungodly stuff. And God just raises Hannah from the dust and seats her on high and takes Eli and his sons and just basically wipes them off the history of salvation history. And then there is a phrase in chapter 2 that I'm going to read for you that really, well, my buddy Brandon Cash tells me this sums up the whole theme of 1 Samuel. And who am I to argue? He's the Old Testament guy. I'm the New Testament guy. But it's a little bit later on your outline. It's over in, I don't have the reference, 2 Samuel 2, 27 to 31 there, where God says, he says, far be it from me. He says, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Those who honor me, I will honor, Hannah. And those who despise me, Eli and his sons, will be lightly esteemed. We're going to transition to communion now, and we'll catch the rest of your outline down the line when we get into later in 1 Samuel. We're going to transition to communion now, and Jen and the team will be up here in just a second. But I want to leave you with a thought about the way God's great reversal. Let me ask you a question. We've run into some new characters in Old Testament history. Peninnah. Do you know anybody who names their daughter Peninnah? No. Do you know anybody who names their son Hophni or Phineas? No. They've been forgotten, and the only way anybody would even hear those names is to come to church and hear a sermon on 1 Samuel 1 and 2. Quite the contrary. I'm having lunch with one of my students in the cafe at Biola this week. His name is Samuel, and his mother's name is Hannah. Fast forward. In the first century, say 25, 27 AD, everybody heard and knew of the most powerful man in the then-known world because his name was on every statue, every coin, every inscription all across the empire. His name was Augustus Caesar. And he was more powerful in his day than any national leader is in the world today. He was the empire of Rome, and Rome had conquered every known nation, every known empire around them. Everybody knew who the man was, Augustus. In contrast, nobody, except maybe his family and a few peasants in a small village in Judea, would have known anything about a little peasant baby named Jesus who was born in Bethlehem and grew up in Nazareth. He was a peasant nobody on the far fringes of the Roman Empire. There would have been maybe 2 handfuls of people who even knew about this little kid, okay? And now, interestingly enough, 2,000 years later, what has happened, the great reversal. Folks, the only time anybody ever hears anymore about Augustus Caesar, unless they're taking a history course or something, the only time anybody hears is at Christmas in church when we read Luke 2:1, where it says, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered." Folks, Caesar Augustus is a nobody. Every time you write a date, you are referencing the birth of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ has utterly transformed the world we live in. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. If you're facing challenges today, if you're weak, if you're empty, if you're powerless, get ready because you are in a place where God can work. Let's pray.